this is a mistake, isn't it? Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, loin streamer, and today I have a new job because I'm probably about to get canceled. The opinions in today's video are things that have gotten small publishers canceled in the past. But you know, as always, I hope that we can have a discussion and not make it a dichotomy. However, since I am going to get canceled, I did want to share that I have gotten a new job to take care of the cancellation. I am also, of course, wearing the uniform for the new job. You know, in case you need to see some work here. Yeah, you're not getting me fired from this construction company. Guys, you don't know how bad it is. Save me. Actually, don't, because I can take joy in the little things, okay? I am having a great time being a little bit out of control. No. Okay, let's actually get into the video. Before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. That is number one, Islam Y, where I give you guys a prompt, you respond to the prompt, and then first Monday video of the month, basking in your greatness. Number two, and there's always, oh my gosh, there are always great responses. I am always flabbergasted by the talent within the community of people that respond. Number two is if you are an indie author, either with a book coming out or a book that's already out, and you would like your first chapter shared on this channel with this audience, all you gotta do is click on the link down below, submit your first chapter and your cover. It'll be read on this channel, and hopefully it'll help your book find new readers. We just read a new one on Monday called Rising Wind, and hopefully more people will just find great indie authors that they never knew existed and new favorite stories, because that is what this channel is really about. Books, discussions, getting my feelings out when I have read a book. Oh my gosh, book reviews coming eventually when I organize my thoughts, because I still have to publish my Lightlark feelings, and now I have some Grady Hendrix feelings. So that's where we are. Hopefully Bret Easton Ellis does not let me down with his new book, because that is on my roster, and I have an indie book on my roster. Yeah. Number three, if you would like to check out any of my books to see the insanity that goes on in my head, they're available at all of your favorite retailers, or you can ask for them at your library. Recently, my novel Boom 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 received a Royal Palm Award in satire, so at least it's approved by some people. Even if they were like, also because it's Ukraine and set in Ukraine and what happened this year. I'm getting off. I don't know what's wrong with me today. Sorry. I don't have to pay $5 to apologize. You do, though. Okay. So, well, from the title, that's like all of the business that I have to do. Oh yeah, and join us on Friday nights for the Loin stream and Tuesday nights for Yakuza stream. Yes. I don't have a problem, okay? It's not like I have just been freed from the gilded cage, so to speak, of Tuesday night for zero, so that I can just play it. It's going to be a problem. Guys, this is... Moving on. So, if the title doesn't already give it away, we are about to have a discussion about trigger warnings, and just like what my opinions are on trigger warnings, because everybody's got their own opinion on trigger warnings, and if we have different opinions on trigger warnings, that's okay, because it's not an insult to just have a different opinion or a different experience or a different approach and to think things differently. And I think that we need to be discussing our different opinions and approaches and reasons for why we believe the things that we do, just to understand. Create better empathy and compassion, even if we don't agree, because you do not have to force somebody into compliance or have the same opinion in order to say, I understand your perspective. I can't live like that, but I understand your perspective. Usually, when it comes out that somebody is like, I don't believe in or I'm against trigger warnings, they kind of get jumped on. Silver Shamrock Publishing got in trouble a couple of years ago from their staff saying that they did not believe in trigger warnings. And so there is this contentious issue, mostly because if people say they don't like or don't believe in trigger warnings, they get jumped on. But the people that do believe in trigger warnings, I mean, I'm not gonna say you probably get it. I'm not gonna say you don't get insulted, because I've seen a lot of people online that just are very happy to insult anybody that they don't agree with, which is also why I'm trying to make this fairly fairly respectful space-ish of like where we can disagree and agree, and then just say, hey, we can agree to disagree. But so also I want to preface before I get into, I have like 10 different points that I want to make specifically about trigger warnings. And my thoughts on trigger warnings. But before I get into that, I want to make it perfectly clear, because it feels like most of the time when I have a conversation or I try to share my thoughts on something, it's taken as a, we either have to ban it or we have to support it or something like that. And I don't think that that's the dichotomy of either allow it or we have to regulate it or we have to abandon it. I think that we can just agree or disagree and then leave it at that without some kind of regulation one way or another. What I'm about to say about trigger warnings is just my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean that my opinions can't be changed if given new information. This is just where I am, in the same way that your opinions on trigger warnings are based on whatever experiences you've had, and I won't hold that against you either, so please don't hold it against me. Number one that I would like to say is they are proven detrimental to emotional and mental maturity. There are studies out there that show the reliance on trigger warnings actually creates anxiety in people that would not have necessarily had anxiety when reading the book, and actually makes them less likely to read something or get into something that would expand the emotional maturity, and is actually something that that person is able to get through. Because it creates, you know what, Anxiety is the fear of something that hasn't happened yet. And I know that's an oversimplification of what it feels like when you're going through anxiety. But so there are proven studies that say those that rely on that the trigger warnings at the start of a book are actually worse for the mental and emotional state of the reader than going through the actual experience itself, because it makes people step away from something that could emotionally fortify them by going through it and seeing that it's not that bad. It kind of makes me think of, don't take this in a weird way, but when you're trying to train a dog out of being afraid of something like nail clippings and or brushing, or, you know, just like they got a weird trigger to something. One of the ways that you're supposed to do that is when the dog is responding scared, you're supposed to maintain a hold on the dog. Like we're talking about nail clipping right now. You're supposed to maintain hold on the dog and help them see it through to the other side of their anxiety, and they start to learn that that thing is not as bad as they think it is. However, if every time the dog like jerks because the dog is afraid of what's about to happen, and then you are afraid of the dog's reaction, then the dog learns that all it has to do is jerk and you're going to let go, and then the thing that's making it uncomfortable will stop. However, if you hold on to that dog and you see it through that thing that makes it anxious, then slowly over time, in general, that is supposed to help the dog learn that the anxiety is unwarranted and they get through the thing easier. It's a type of exposure therapy. But you do have to, in a lot of cases with very extreme anxiety, you do have to hold on to that dog and see them through regardless of how fearful they are, because that is the only way to get them there. So in the same way with trigger warnings in books, if you constantly, see somebody do that jerk reaction to just the smallest thing and you go, never mind, you're never going to train yourself to be emotionally or mentally stronger when facing these things. And you might be able to escape it in a book because somebody has put a trigger warning at the front of the book, so you're not going to have to deal with it. But as cliche as it is, life doesn't have trigger warnings. And when you run into somebody who is truly something that is going to mentally or emotionally affect you, you put yourself at a disadvantage because you've never learned how to emotionally fortify yourself to get through something difficult, because you've guarded yourself so much and made that part of you so delicate. And it can be really difficult. So I highly recommend, I'm not saying face everything down, because you can't face everything down necessarily. I have my own issues that I'm still working with that I mostly just avoid the triggers of, because I am not prepared to handle those things. I'm just not. But that's also an option, is if you're not prepared to deal with something when it comes to you, close the book, walk away. Which brings me to number 2, is a book is a book. A book cannot harass you. So if a book does something that is upsetting to you, close the book, walk away. Close the book, burn the book. I have had a couple of books. Now, I've not had any that have been like emotionally traumatizing to me. I've just had some that I was like, this is so bad. I'm not gifting this book to anybody. Garbage. I can't say I don't believe in not throwing books away, because there are some books that just do not deserve to be passed on to other people. Yeah. Part of emotional and mental fortitude is knowing when something is too much for you to handle, and so you step away from it. This is something that carries over into other facets of a person's life. It can be turning off a video game, turning off a movie, stepping away from a social situation. I recently had a time where I had to step away from a social group, like a Discord, that I created 2 years ago, because I just couldn't deal with the conversations as they were happening, specifically because I get really sick of people reinterpreting everything that I say, and it's like, I try to be as straightforward as possible to the point that I end up repeating myself, so I'm sorry that I put you guys through that. I try to cover my bases, and it's still not enough. And I was getting bombarded with that in like every social situation, that no matter how clear I was, people were reinterpreting what I said, and that included just like me saying, I like something, and somebody being like, why do you hate other thing? Other thing was not even in the equation. So I just couldn't deal with being reframed as saying things I didn't say. So I had to step away, because I have no control over what other people say. And I know that I can misinterpret things that other people are saying. And I probably also put the onus on myself more than other people, that I am failing in social interactions. But it is not up to me to tell other people, one, how to act, or two, how they should be responding to anything. Because we're all adults, and I want to respect other people for their perspective, and if I can't take it, then I need to walk away. And then I can come back when I can mentally deal with it, and no hard feelings at the people that I was having upset with because of where I was at that time. Going back to the book thing, going back to the trigger warning, it's a skill and a responsibility to yourself that I feel like is getting lost, where instead it's starting to become like somebody needs to take care of this thing for me so that I never feel uncomfortable and I never have to deal with this thing. Anything I don't like, I want removed out of my life before it ever runs into me, or immediately after it runs into me, because I don't want it. And I just don't think that's helpful. Number 3, the cover, title, synopsis, and genre are trigger warnings. I cannot freaking believe, especially, how prevalent it is, and get ready for offense, I'm sure. This whole thing is offensive. But I cannot believe how prevalent it is to require that there is a requirement of trigger warnings, specifically in the horror genre. What are you signing up for? Come on. Also, I think it's an insult to put like racism trigger warning next to decapitation or pedophilia or sexual molestation and rape or human trafficking. Like, it is an insult to the damage that is done to human lives, to be like, oh, manspreading is in this book, oh, somebody being disrespectful to women is in this book, so that needs to be a trigger warning. Like, just accept, number 1, books are generally way more hardcore than movies and television, because you are not using real people in a book. So you can do pretty much anything that you want. Also, especially if you are self-published or indie published, there are a lot fewer censors, so you can do whatever you want. The most brutal parts of It by Stephen King are not in the movie. The most brutal parts of generally most books are not in the movie. In the American Psycho movie, you do not get Patrick Bateman stabbing that child and then pretending to be a doctor so he can hold the child while it dies at the zoo. Like, just realize books are hardcore, and if you read books, you too are hardcore. The cover, title, synopsis, and genre are usually a hint of what you're getting into. Like, let's go back to The Pawn and the Puppet, where it's a story that's set inside of an asylum in a dystopian situation. So you're going to have possibly some very messed up stuff, because in dystopian situations, you take everything to an extreme. Well, everything that you want to highlight. It's also in an asylum, so you're going to have representations of crazy that may or may not be really crazy, or may not be accurate, because we're in a dystopian society. So just prepare yourselves based on the description of what it is you're going into. The trigger warning hot button is often used as a tool for manipulation and blackmail. Now, I've seen this mostly in comments talking about stuff like The Pawn and the Puppet, talking about Shamrock Publishing, where it's, you need to do this or else we will ruin you. You can 100% say, if you don't use trigger warnings, then I'm not going to buy this book because I don't want to be exposed to something that I'm uncomfortable at being exposed to. Like, Your choices are your choices for whatever makes you comfortable and whatever your needs are. That's personal responsibility. But the time that it's used to try to blackmail and manipulate people into compliance with you is kind of when it starts crossing a line of dubious, you're not a good guy. Number 5, there are never enough trigger warnings for the people who want them. This goes back to the Pawn and the Puppet as a specific example, is people were harassing that author in order to add more. This is actually how I found this book. People were harassing this author to add more trigger warnings because there were not enough trigger warnings for the content of the book. However, you then go and look at the reviews that say, oh, look at all of these trigger warnings on this book. No, they are not enough. Yes, she added more. No, they are still not enough. And you will never be able to anticipate the things that bother somebody else. Like, people come to me with things that are so mundane to them that actually are the things that trigger my really bad responses for my issues that I'm still dealing with. And I try not to respond for the most part, so hopefully the subject will pass. I typically disassociate when those things come up, so I really try to move on from them and not respond and not encourage any responses. And if the conversation continues on, I go, hey, I can't talk about this. But otherwise, other people have no idea what my issues are unless I share them. And that's the same for every author and every book. An author cannot write a book with you in mind and remembering and thinking of everything that is going to bother somebody else. Like, if we talk about super mundane issues, what if somebody has an issue with eating a hamburger because one time they went to a store and they got this hamburger that had like this gross thing mixed into the meat and they bit into it and they still remember what it felt like to bite into this toe in the freaking ground beef, that they are so disgusted and they get a vomit response from this hamburger that they needed a trigger warning that they were eating hamburgers in this book. There is no way that anybody could know that. There is no way that anybody could know. Freaking, let's talk about infidelity, since I already talked about infidelity again. I get so angry when infidelity comes up, especially infidelity as it's glamorized, or as it's treated as an empowerment thing, or as it's treated as something that doesn't matter, or it's kinky. Like, I cannot stand it. And I will rant so hard about infidelity being treated in a certain way. However, there's no way for the person writing infidelity as a kink to know how angry I get when it comes to infidelity, because they don't know what my past is. A writer is usually generally thinking of their characters, the story they have to tell, the theme that they're working on, if they're thinking that far into it, and they're not thinking about everybody else and every possible response and every emotional trauma that could come out of something that is included in their book. And it is so unreasonable to assume that the author can think of you specifically, and especially when you get into the mundane things. And if people were just saying, hey, if it's got this kind of murder in it, if it's got this suicide in it, whatever, please put these trigger warnings, because these are all emotionally high situations. However, you look at the conversation around trigger warnings, and it is not just these high emotionally intensive traumatic events that are being put into trigger warnings. It's stuff like that guy was a misogynist. It's not these big deal issues. So you can never know exactly what is going to trigger somebody. And now it's suddenly the author's responsibility to read the minds of everybody who may or may not ever read their books. And that is kind of insane to me. Number 6 kind of goes into what I just said, but it's required for you to anticipate every possible thing that makes someone uncomfortable, and that is impossible. Number 7, when it's said that this isn't about forcing people to do something, it's just about seeing you try, it's a lie. As I just said with number 5 and number 6, the conversation often comes around with, that's not good enough. It becomes a manipulation tool, a tool of destruction, a sledgehammer to smack into the temple of the poor author when they're tied to a chair. You know what you did? Freaking A. I'm still upset, but it's a good story. Did I want a trigger warning for that? No. Moving on. Number 8, and I've kind of said this already because I already went on a rant, so these are going to be pretty quick probably because I just said most of what I had to say. Number 8, it's insanely insulting to put rape and pedophilia on the same list as negative self-image, misogyny, and parents yelling at each other. Like, there's a difference between trauma and being uncomfortable, okay? Or being irritated. Number 9. Being uncomfortable is not the same thing as being triggered. Ultimately, if you don't like something, it's your responsibility to step away from it. I do it all the time, and I'm forced to do it because some of the things that make me uncomfortable, like I said, are not uncomfortable for others and are actually very normal. I constantly have other people's issues shoved in my face that are legitimately just regular things that I can't deal with, that other people think nothing of whatsoever. And when I'm talking about my issues, I'm not talking about, I'm slightly uncomfortable. I'm talking about immediately a sweat, or just thinking about it breaks me into a sweat. I break into a sweat if I'm really into it. If the conversation really gets going, if I gets going, I mean like 2 sentences with specific descriptions. I get dizzy and sick to my stomach and grossed out, doesn't even begin to explain the word for the things that people find mundane or even positive in referring to themselves or in what they need to talk about for themselves. And all I can do is walk away and try to minimize the conversation because I don't want to talk about my mental health with every stranger that approaches me with this subject. Because that also just makes it worse, honestly. Since then now we're directly talking about the thing that triggers a physiological response. So, and number 10, oh my god. It's enough to ruin stuff. There's a reason Tyra's book dropped from a 5 to a 4. Like, I enjoyed that book. But when I have to read through some content, that's just... Yeah. Okay, moving on to my last point. Going back to what this point actually was, though. A trigger is not being made uncomfortable. And I feel like when you're starting to put stuff in, like misogyny, something pissed me off. Negative self-image, that's uncomfortable because I have a negative self-image. Like, putting that as a trigger and calling discomfort the same thing as something that is a psychological response that is usually very, very intense is not the same thing. And I understand using things colloquially, but I think we need to also understand that colloquial reasoning is not the same thing as a hardcore psychological response. And if you are having that intense response to these things where you truly are triggered and you're having the physiological response like I'm describing or something akin to that, it is probably something that you should work on. Or avoid personally, but not to demand things of others, because I cannot demand of others to stop having regular conversations because these things bother me. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Number 10, not knowing what to expect will actually better prepare you for everything else in life and will give you more flexibility. So like I said earlier on, when you use trigger warnings, there are studies that show that it actually is detrimental to emotional and mental maturity because it's telling you what to expect and that you should avoid it. I also said, as cliche as it is, life doesn't come with trigger warnings. And so by putting trigger warnings in something, and actively avoiding those things because of it, you're stopping yourself from having the flexibility to go through something that may be uncomfortable or to ignore it or to find coping mechanisms through that thing. By not having trigger warnings, you just go into something blind, and it forces you to adapt to the situation that you are in, whether that is closing the book, whether that is skipping a page, skipping 10 pages until that scene is over, or just reading through the thing and going, that wasn't as bad as I expected it to be, or going through those pages and going, my heart is pounding right now, I am having an emotional and physiological response to the content that was in this book. Give me a second to recover. And then you move on. And that better prepares you for having responses in real life. Because let me tell you, if you are emotionally responding in a very high intensity way to content that's in books, you're going to have situations in real life that you are also responding to with high emotional intensity. And in that case, it's often when you're dealing with another person. And I don't know about you, but I have seen a drastic dip in understanding other people's perspectives. And I know somebody's going to be like, well, see, you don't understand my perspective because I like trigger warnings and need them for this. I understand that people like that some people like trigger warnings and some people like complete avoidance. I get it. I just say I disagree. And I think that we can disagree and not think that the other person is evil for the way that they would like to live their lives. It's when you start trying to force other people to live like you, and blackmail people into doing things your way, that it starts to get questionable. Like, the good deeds start to get questionable when you use it as a bludgeoning tool for compliance. It's recommending somebody use trigger warnings because that's what you prefer, and then supporting those that do use trigger warnings is a far cry from the way that the author of Pawn and the Puppet was treated for not using trigger warnings, or how the Shamrock Publishing was treated for saying that they didn't believe in using trigger warnings. So there needs to be this separation of saying, I don't agree with this thing, and it's not a personal attack to want to live life differently or to see things differently. And I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of situations where it just seems like people don't really get that it's... I don't know how to say this so that it doesn't sound offensive. I just feel like when you say that you have a different life experience or different emotional needs than other people, they take it as if you're saying something is wrong with them. And it's nothing to do with that. It's just a personal preference. And our differences are what make conversations so interesting. I may never agree with people on certain things. I'm looking at you, Grady Hendrix. I'm looking at you, Southern Book Club Guide to Vampire Slaying, or whatever you're called. A lot of people like that. I have a bunch of friends who have given it 5 stars. I will never give it 5 stars. I will share with you my reasons for why I hated that book. But I don't think anything different of people that had a different experience with it. I think it's interesting to hear the different experiences that people have. I think it also gives a lot of insight into what values people have by learning about the things that they respond to or they don't respond to, and the way that they cope with those things. So the way that somebody is going to approach or understand the housewives as presented in that book is going to be different than me, and it's going to tell me about them and their perspective and what they think and what they know and what their perceptions are. And perceptions, go check out my perceptions video on here if you want to see me talk about perceptions, are a very interesting thing. Perspective. It's the same thing with also, his name is Augustin, is I've seen people that really enjoyed that book now. Though they haven't really posted reviews on specifics of how they interpreted these characters. And it's one of the reasons that I really would have loved to be able to talk to the author of that book, because I want to know what she saw and what she was thinking as she was creating the book versus the interpretations and the experiences I had, which seemed very different than what she was thinking when she was writing it. And that's not to say either of us are wrong in the way that we perceived when writing versus reading. But it makes for an interesting conversation to say, this is what I saw and why I interpreted it this way, especially when it's so vastly different. But you have to have the hope that the other person, you have to have the hope and the belief that the other person is not evil and out to get you or trying to hurt you in any way. It's just a different experience. Anyway, those are my thoughts, kind of all over the place, but as you know, I like to just do conversation. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Again, this isn't an argument for or against, like banning or enforcing something. It's just the existence of, and they can exist and people can use them and people cannot use them. In my opinion, is you don't destroy someone's life because they don't enjoy or support trigger warnings. I specifically felt like this video was necessary to make for the conversation because sometimes it feels like people are scared to have this discussion because you can get destroyed by the response to it. And clearly I'm taken care of by Majima's construction company, so hopefully I have a future of some kind. There's going to be another spicy topic video coming up in the near future. For discussion stuff, and yeah, it's about sex. But so stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you so much for hanging out, listening to me ramble, and have a great weekend. Don't die.
Hello, boomers! My name is Yanananana. How are you feeling today? In case you didn't know, I'm a YouTuber from Nide, a small town in eastern Ukraine. My family has never really understood what I do in the woods, but all I've ever wanted is to make a better life for us all. Papa always comes home from the mines dirty, angry, and tired. It's a necessary evil to do your job and be in a place that you don't want to be. But I've never wanted to spend my life doing exactly what was necessary of me. Everything changed for me when a couple of Americans appeared at my door. They said they wanted to sponsor my channel and handed me military-grade explosives. Can you believe it? Military-grade. The lights will be incredible going forward. With this help, my videos will be next level. I just hope they are as they say, and this isn't some kind of trick. I mean, what would there be to gain? Boris says people are simple. Everything comes down to money and power. And Alex tells me ignorance will not save me from trouble. I understand where they are coming from, but I do not like to think that way. There is more to life than a cruel of superficial goods, hatred, and destruction. Anyway, I do not like where this video is going, so I will see you on the explosives field. Boom, boom, boom. Salute.